Welcome to Serve Nebraska's Budgeting Section 2. We are going to talk about budgeting for members and talk about Section 2 of the overall budget. This is a very program specific section where we're talking about member costs. We're talking about the living allowance, member support to members, FICA, workman's comp, health insurance. In terms of the living allowance, you need to figure out, again, what type of member works for your program. There's all different kinds of positions, and we're going to go over the different kinds of slots that you can have. Again, one of the keys is you want to make sure that all members in the same position with the same position description receive the same living allowance. That will be something that will be very important. Note that there's also a minimum and maximum for full-time living allowances each year and a specific education award amount. For less than full-time members, you can set a minimum, you can set the living allowance that works for you. Again, you want to look at what is the amount that will allow you to recruit and retain the appropriate members. In terms of health insurance, only full-time members are required to have health insurance. So you need to make sure that you're looking at that as a recruiting tool. There's specific requirements about the health insurance, and there are certain providers that cater directly towards AmeriCorps programs that if you are funded that you could look into as options that provide reasonably cost health insurance to fit the AmeriCorps program needs. Again, note that the living allowance and the other member support costs are really important around member retention. Again, you want to ensure that you are able to keep the member sustained, which is the purpose of the living allowance, for their term of service. Note that even though unemployment insurance is mentioned, it is not allowable cost in Nebraska. However, the living allowances paid to the members are part of general taxes, and AmeriCorps members will have to complete W-4 forms, and you will have to withhold FICA. You also want to make sure that you get workers' compensation or a death and dismemberment policy to protect the safety of the members while they're serving. Another important piece that we talked about when we talked about the general budget, we talked about it again when we're talking about Section 1, the personnel costs, is the National Service Criminal History Checks. Again, it is critical for all staff and members that are paid on the grant to have a National Service Criminal History Check before any salary or living allowances are charged to the grant. It is clear to ensure compliance with this policy to develop written policies and procedures to ensure who at your organization is going to foster this responsibility. It's also important to communicate throughout your organization who the responsible parties are and how you're going to communicate when these checks are done through your HR, fiscal, and program leads in the program. Again, ensure that you have someone knowledgeable about these National Service Criminal History Checks. They are the largest disallowed cost across the country and in Nebraska. Again, you want to make sure that you're maintaining the appropriate documentation to support that you had the criminal history check completed prior to charging any living allowance to the grant. Another key part about members is to ensure that you're meeting the eligibility requirements in the grant. Again, these are AmeriCorps specific regulations, and you can look at 2522.200 for further information. In general, to be an AmeriCorps member, the member must be a lawful citizen, national or permanent resident alien of the United States. Again, there's very specific regulations around that. So if they are not a citizen, I suggest that you meet with the commission staff to ensure that you have the proper documentation because it is very different and unique to the individuals and where they end up coming from. There's also an age requirement. Members must be at least 17, or if you have an out of school youth, they can participate in a youth corps if at age 16. Members also must have a high school diploma or its equivalent, or have not dropped out of school to enroll in AmeriCorps program. And they must agree to obtain a high school diploma or equivalent while they're working on service. Again, tutors might be a allowable cost if you have members that do not have a high school diploma. Again, these requirements are laid out in the specific AmeriCorps regulations, which are 45 CFR 2522.200. Again, they're federal program requirements specific to AmeriCorps. And lastly, when we're talking about Section 2, these costs add up very quick and are likely the majority of the costs in your budget. So it's important to really look at the AmeriCorps members, not just from a cost perspective, but from a program services perspective. Ensure that you are aligning the goals and objectives and the service with the type of members that would fit best in your program. Again, here's a list of all the types of members and their MSY equivalent. Again, the MSY is an important piece because that is similar to the FTE for a full-time equivalent, but on the member basis, and it's math specific to AmeriCorps that's based on this chart and not necessarily percentages. Again, you can choose whatever type members and the number of members that you can A, afford, and B, supervise to meet your program design. Again, the MSY is a critical component because the MSY calculation is the amount that you can apply to as a maximum, and you take the MSY calculation for the total number of members and you multiply that by the maximum cost per member in the application. You can then identify the maximum federal funds and back into the parts of your budget. So a lot of people work on parts of Section 2 and really using this chart to determine what are the program AmeriCorps members type and number that best suits their program and their budgets.